over South Carolina.
Yeah.
Now they play Ole Miss. What I find really interesting about this entire situation with Gabrielle and Patrick is that the SEC is so tight that Georgia's obviously number one, clearly.
Yeah.
But from 2 through about 9, maybe even 10,
Yeah.
the gap is like 3 games. So this weekend could be huge. And Alabama and Ole Miss are kind of right there in that mix.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of these teams that we're looking at, or the kind of question is going to be, can they make it to a spot where they can host a regional? I feel like that is like the consistent question about several of the teams, to your point.
Right. Patrick, you've been firing the warning shots on Ole Miss all season long. And Alabama head coach Rob Vaughn, he talked about it. He said, a bad weekend this weekend, you can slip all the way to the 9 seeds in Hoover at the SEC tournament. They obviously want to have a good end of the season, end of the regular season, but Ole Miss is no slouch.
Yeah, but also at the same time, this is an Alabama team that I feel like a lot of people wrote off after the Tennessee series. I felt like that was their opportunity. Yep, here we go. They're laughing. That was their opportunity.
Like, as they should.
Yeah, as they should. I was smoking a lot on Rocky
Hey,
Top.
don't bet against the balls. Me and Gerhard had this conversation last night.
We did.
Yeah, we just had this conversation about how I'd like to make fun of you for it. So. But ever since then, they've really bounced back. 2 straight SEC sweeps. Again, it's South Carolina. You should sweep an inferior opponent. And, Rob Vaughn kind of took some shots. And we'll listen to the press conference here in a minute. But he kind of took some shots at South Carolina saying, the atmosphere is down. It's like, oh, boy, if good old Paul Maneri was still there, he wouldn't have really been too happy about it. But unfortunately for them, Paul Maneri is no longer there. It's Monty Lee now. But this, and I can't wait to talk with Courtney Mims later about Arkansas, because I feel like Alabama and Arkansas are 2 teams that are quietly going on a run that nobody is really talking about. I think 2 weeks ago, after that Tennessee series, people were like, all right, there goes Alabama's chance at hosting a regional. Now I think if they take 2 of 3 from Ole Miss, and I'd be interested to hear what you guys think, if they take 2 of 3, I think they sit in a really nice spot to maybe, sneak into that 15 or 16 seed. Now, they may need a little bit of help, and that might include my West Virginia Mountaineers. But you look somewhere else for help, because I think the Mountaineers are going to sweep and host a regional and maybe even a super regional.
Wow.
Give me the Mountaineers.
Going 2-step in it, which I don't – it's not crazy because the Mountaineers have played great baseball. But, no, I do think Alabama with – either a series win and or a sweep of Ole Miss and then a good showing in Hoover at the SEC championship, they would put themselves in a really good position to have that. And we've seen this a lot with NCAA committees. They try to they take your full resume, but what you do at the end of the season, the last thing they saw really, weighs heavily on their minds. And so if Alabama does play well in Tuscaloosa and plays well in Hoover, I think they got a shot.
Yeah, I think so. And I think also, to your point, all of these SEC teams are so close, and this is such a dominant conference when it comes to baseball. It'll be really interesting to see once they get to Hoover and how they match up in that tournament. But I wish I would have wrote down, where every team is, because it's felt like this entire week, every team that we've talked about, it's like, well, if they have a strong showing in Hoover, then they'll be able to host or do whatever. So it's like, it feels like there's so many of this exact situation for several teams in the SEC.
Right, and unlike softball, because softball, there's so many elite teams, and we knew going into the tournament in Lexington, we knew that Oklahoma was going to be a host C. We knew that Alabama was going to be a host C. We knew that Tennessee was going to be a host C. It was just where.
Right.
Arkansas is the same way. It feels like a lot of teams in the SEC, they're fighting for their position. They're jockeying for that position just to be able to host, fighting with the rest of the country. And Patrick, you mentioned teams like, West Virginia, as you mentioned, has a chance. There's other teams outside of this conference that can kind of box them out, so to speak, from hosting a regional.
Yeah, and I do kind of feel like this is just so weird, the fact that I think the biggest threat to the SEC in order to bring home a national championship yet again for what I think will be the 8th year if they manage to pull it off, is the Big Ten. But the Big Ten is projected to get the least amount of bids of the Power 4 conferences. It's just because they're so top heavy. Nebraska is starting to really catch their stride. UCLA has been good absolutely throughout this entire year. Oregon took a game from UCLA, so that's another team to keep an eye on. The Ducks up there do have a pretty good baseball program. But I think just being in the SEC, and we talk about this, with football, we talk about this with men's golf, men's and women's golf. It just prepares you for these out-of-conference games where I think UCLA is like the only true like superior team like all around.
Right.
Georgia Tech has its flaws. Drew Burris can't do everything. UNC also has its flaws. Yes, I'm sure that the Tar Heels are going to get to Omaha, but I feel like the lack of experience potentially could come back to haunt them. So that's why I feel like, Alabama is in a good spot here. I think they sit in 4th right now.
Yeah.
It feels so much like this men's basketball season where you got one team that's really pulling away. The Georgia Bulldogs, undoubtedly, and the stats back it up, they're the hottest team in baseball right now with a 9-game win streak, and they just swept LSU. Goodbye, LSU. There goes your NCAA tournament chances. But now you get to welcome Ole Miss, and this is going to be a huge series for both of these teams, and I am honestly looking forward to it because this is when baseball starts to really get good.
Yeah, and you want to be playing your best baseball right now. It seems like Alabama is. They picked up a sweep, as Patrick said, over South Carolina. We heard from head coach Rob Vaughn on the sweep.
Yeah, I mean, just proud of the resilience of our kids right there. Obviously we got 3 good starts again, which is the biggest key. I think that's been the biggest key to our whole season is our starting pitching. So 3 great starts. I think you lose LeBron, halfway through Friday's game, and JoJo does a great job of stepping in, had some huge hits, obviously hit the game-tying homer there on Saturday. And then same thing, then you go lose Brady Neal, same thing the next day to the stuff, and Will Plattner steps in, does a great job. I think gets 3 hits, hits a homer. So just proud of like the next man up mentality that the guys played with. And just doing what you're supposed to do. I think it's really easy to sit there and look at a team kind of at the bottom of the conference, and we're just expected to go in and sweep that series. And it's a lot harder said than done, and I'm really proud of the maturity of our guys. The atmosphere wasn't super crazy this weekend. It was a little bit deader, but they didn't let that affect them. So finding ways to get all 3 on the road was huge, and now we got to finish strong this weekend against Ole Miss.
If you are Brady Neal, who plays for Alabama, you might say, well, I might be the difference here. He used the LSU transfer. We're having a really solid season so far. Patrick, as baseball is obviously a team sport. You got to have your pitching, you got to have your hitting. But when you have a guy that's as hot as he is right now, that confidence level has to be through the roof.
Yeah, and I also feel like baseball, like football, but in a lesser sense, is a war of attrition. Obviously, once we get to this point in the football season, you've got guys with bumps and bruises. You've got guys that are going to be out for the rest of the season. And the fact that Alabama was still able, again, we need to kind of put an asterisk on it just because it is South Carolina.
Right.
The fact that they are still able to hold strong, even without Justin LeBron, who had an injury last weekend. Don't think it's going to hurt his draft stock by any means.
Yeah.
It is kind of interesting that Alabama's having this success, but LeBron hasn't really, blown you away. I think he's batting somewhere right around 268. Yes, he leads the team in home runs, but he has struck out a lot, and he has made, some questionable errors in the field. So I still think he's going to be a top 10 draft pick once the draft comes up here in just a couple months. But it is weird that Alabama's doing this all without, Justin LeBron.
Their superstar playing well, yeah.
And Tyler Fay has been an absolute revelation on the mound.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of, the fact that he's this close to the Major League Baseball draft and this close to that next level, like we're talking about with Scotty, maybe just putting too much pressure on himself to perform at the highest level.
A little bit of Darren Peterson in him?
I
can't do that.
That seems a little unfair.
I can't do that to him.
At least he's playing. Peterson just told Coach Self, you know what? I ain't playing today. I'm not practicing today. Your thoughts on this Alabama team as they face Ole Miss this weekend? Make a pick if you want to. I think we're going to make some picks at the end of the week, so you probably could change it.
Is this a home game for Alabama?
This is a home series,
okay.
yeah.
Well, that's huge for them.
Yeah.
Because I feel like whenever you go to Oxford, it always adds a little bit of extra pressure just because their fans are so crazy, and I know they definitely are at this time of the year.
Right now.
especially.
As their academics are getting fired on all those shots
They
by
just
everybody.
have to do basket weaving when they're in class. So
the funniest thing was, quick segue. We were talking about this yesterday. We were talking about Steve Sarkisian, and you were like, but they're kind of right. They're kind of right.
I mean, he is, and that's not even my subjective opinion. Is that the right word?
There you go.
My subjective opinion. Sometimes I get those mixed up. That's not even my subjective opinion because, like Patrick mentioned, they have a 97% acceptance rate. So that's just to the.
It's just who they are.
It's just known.
It's just known.
It's just known by the community.